The wind had settled into a hush over the wide plains, the kind of hush that felt like a held breath. The sky, tinged with copper at the edges, lowered itself into the evening, while the last streaks of light caught on the slanted boards of Calder Boone's ranch house. Inside, the air was thick with silence, the kind that had grown like ivy around his days. Wealth had made the house sturdy, handsome even, but it could not fill the hollow places where laughter and voices should have been. Calder sat at the heavy oak table, his boots resting on the worn floorboards, listening to the faint rattle of the windmill outside. Solitude had long been his only companion, loyal in its persistence, merciless in its weight. When the knock came, it startled him enough that his glass tilted, spilling whiskey in a dark stain across the wood. He rose slowly as if the sound might dissolve if he moved too quick. The knock came again, softer this time, measured, as though the visitor feared what might answer. Curiosity pressed against his ribs, but suspicion stirred as well. Few came this far out, fewer still after sunset. He reached the door, hand tightening around the handle, and when he pulled it open, the world seemed to pause. She stood there in the dimming light, the faint glow from his lantern catching on her cheekbones, on the strands of dark hair clinging to her temple. Her clothes bore the dust of travel, the hem torn where brush must have caught. Yet her eyes, deep, dark, unflinching, held something steadier than the wind, something that made him forget the words he meant to speak. She was young, perhaps 23, but there was no youth in the set of her jaw, only survival. For a breath, neither moved. Then her voice, quiet but deliberate, broke the stillness. "I seek work," she said, each syllable shaped with dignity, though her hands trembled where they clasped before her. Calder's throat tightened. The town was near enough in memory, the whispers loud enough still. He could hear Martha Hensley's voice, sharp as a branding iron. What sort of man keeps her beneath his roof? And Sheriff Dillard's measured warning. Folks don't take kindly to blurred lines. He almost shut the door then. He almost turned away, let silence reclaim its rule. But her eyes held him, demanding an answer he was not ready to give. "I've no work here," he muttered, though the words faltered in the space between them. Her chin lifted, the faintest sign of defiance, but her gaze did not waver. "I will clean. I will mend. I need only bread and shelter." The plea, stripped bare of ornament, landed heavier than gold. Calder's hand remained on the door. He thought of his rooms, dust-layering shelves, cobwebs trembling in corners untouched for years. He thought of nights drawn long with only his harmonica to fill them. Yet he also thought of the town, of watchful eyes, of judgment that came swift and merciless. Shame flared in him, not for her, but for his own cowardice. Still, he hesitated, the moment stretching until even the wind outside seemed to wait. Finally he stepped aside. "Come in then," he said, his voice harsher than he meant. She moved past him, her presence quiet yet undeniable, as though the air itself shifted to make room for her. The fire was low in the hearth, but she knelt without asking, coaxing it back to life with the practiced hands of one who had built warmth from near nothing. He watched her movements, precise, graceful, resilient. When the flames caught, painting the walls in amber light, she sat back on her heels, her face half shadow, half glow. Calder set bread on the table, poured water into a cup, his offering wordless. She ate sparingly, every bite measured, as though she feared the meal might vanish before her eyes. In the quiet that followed, the house no longer felt the same. It was as if a current had slipped beneath the floorboards, subtle but unrelenting. Calder leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, eyes on her but not daring to linger too long. Questions circled him like hawks. Who was she? What roads had carved those lines into her face? Why his door of all doors? But he asked nothing. Curiosity was a fire he would not yet feed. Morning brought no answers, only the sound of movement where none had been before. He found her sweeping the porch, sleeves rolled, dust rising like smoke in the dawn light. She worked without asking what should be done, as though she could see neglect and know how to mend it. Calder stood in the doorway, boots heavy against the frame, torn between gratitude and unease. Each gesture of hers, each corner cleared, each surface set in order, was a reminder that the house had been waiting for more than him all along. And yet, he could already feel the weight of eyes unseen. When he rode into town that week for supplies, the air shifted the moment he stepped into the mercantile. Martha's gaze sharpened, lips curving with knowledge she hadn't been given. Sheriff Dillard's glance lingered too long, a quiet warning buried in its steadiness. Calder felt heat rise beneath his collar. He bought flour, salt, oil, all with hands that betrayed his tension. He knew the story they were already telling, knew how quickly whispers could harden into judgment. He rode back with his jaw set, the reins tight in his hands, but with every mile closer to the ranch, his chest loosened. Shame bound him in town, but something else waited at home. That evening he took out his harmonica, the notes low, wandering. He had not played for anyone but himself in years. She sat across the room, mending a shirt by firelight, her needle flashing with each pass. Slowly her voice joined, not words he knew, but a melody that wove around his tune like water winding through stone. Her song was old, older than the land they stood upon, and it carried both grief and promise. Calder's fingers faltered, then steadied, drawn by the fragile unity of sound. When the last note faded, silence followed, but it was no longer the silence that had haunted his house. It was full, waiting, alive. He looked at her then, fully, not as a stranger or a shadow, but as something he could not yet name. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw the flicker of a life not yet claimed. Still he said nothing. The moment was enough and perhaps too much. But moments are fragile things. By the week's end, the whispers in town had sharpened into knives. A neighbor turned away when Calder greeted him. Church pews shifted subtly, leaving spaces where once there had been none. He felt the sting of it, the familiar brand of isolation, only now it carried weight beyond his own shoulders. For when he returned home, he found her outside, sitting on the steps, her face tilted to the horizon as if searching for a path out. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, though her posture remained unyielding. "I should go," she said softly, not turning to him. "Your name will suffer because of me." The words lodged in him like a thorn. He had lived years beneath the burden of loneliness, yet only now did he recognize how much heavier it felt when she spoke of leaving. He stepped forward, the boards creaking beneath his weight, but no words came easily. To keep her would mean defiance. To lose her would mean returning to silence, the kind that pressed until a man forgot the sound of his own soul. She rose, brushing dust from her skirt, her resolve gathering even as her hands trembled. She turned toward the edge of the porch, ready to step into the night. Calder's hand shot out, catching her wrist, not harshly, but with a grip that spoke of desperation and truth. She froze, eyes wide as though waiting for him to release her. "You belong here," he said, the words rough, torn from the marrow of him. "Not as a servant. Not as a burden. As mine." Her gaze searched his face, testing the shape of his honesty, weighing it against all the false promises she must have heard before. The night air thickened, the cricket's song pausing as if to witness. Finally her shoulders eased, the faintest breath escaping her lips, not surrender but recognition. She stepped back from the edge of leaving, back into the circle of light spilling from the doorway. In that moment, the ranch no longer seemed a house but a beginning. The world outside might still whisper, the town might still watch, but here, within these walls, something had shifted. Not with fireworks, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet courage of staying when it would have been easier to leave. The wind picked up across the plains, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder, but inside the house, the fire burned steady. Calder and Alara sat in its glow, not speaking, not needing to. Silence, once his prison, had become their shared language, alive with possibility. And though neither could name what lay ahead, both knew that the first step had already been taken.